Welcome back. Thank you for joining me again. Today we are going to struggle with Jesus' words in Matthew 5:17 through 20. I wrote them here, but I think they show up backwards for you. So, try your best. Matthew 5:17 through 20. This is about the law. And this matters a lot today, because sometimes we don't even know what to do with God's law. And so, we'll see if we can come to any resolutions today, or, let's face it, probably not. But hopefully you'll get something to think about, and I'll give you at least a perspective. Do you not think that I have come to take away, verse 17, do you not think that I have come to do away with the law of Moses and the teachings of the prophets? I have not come to do away with them, but to make their teachings come true. Remember that as long as heaven and earth last, not the least point nor the smallest detail of the law will be done away with. Not the least point or the smallest detail. Not until the end of all things, or the end of this age, or the end of whatever, the time. So then, whoever disobeys even the least important of the commandments and teaches others to do the same will be least in the kingdom of heaven. On the other hand, whoever obeys the law and teaches others to do the same will be great in the kingdom of heaven. I tell you then that you will be able to enter the kingdom of heaven only if you are more faithful than the teachers of the law and the Pharisees in doing what God requires. Word of the Lord. So, let's struggle with Jesus' words today. And because how we manifest our understanding of God's law unfolds many ways. I'm going to give a couple extremes here. So one extreme is, of course, some sort of antinomianism or neo-antinomianism. Antinomian just means against law on some level. And we look at it and say, God's grace and forgiveness cover everything, and so we don't have to worry about any part of the law, including the moral law. We don't really have to follow it. Sometimes our hearts just ache to follow it because we love God so much, but in reality, it really doesn't matter anymore. And now, believe me, there are a lot of us that fall under some form of that, more than we think. Okay? And then there's the legalistic view. Sometimes it comes to more strict adherences to certain things, and then other times it can get really hairy, as in sometimes sentences that are in legalism start with the words like, God hates ... fill in the blank, right? We don't like that. So Lutherans, sticking to the Book of Concord, tend to like the strict split of law and gospel, or law and promise, where the law brings us on our knees, on our faces to the gospel, which gives us and showers us with God's amazing grace and robes of righteousness, and then brings us back to a joyful obedience of the law. And really every Christian denomination under the sun has some form of this in some way to be Christian. Okay? This is not selective to the denomination. This is not solely a part of the denomination I come from. It has to be everywhere. But the problem is a hair to the left and a hair to the right over long periods of time gets us to perhaps a weird place, doesn't it? So, this is what we have to think about when we go to these verses. Why talk about this at all? There has to be a reason. Here's the reason. Because people enjoy nailing Christians to the wall with this kind of objection all the time regarding God's law. Tattoos! I've got a tattoo. Does it matter now? Do I get to go to heaven anymore? Or I said a swear word like 6 times yesterday. Do I still get to approach God's throne? Why do I not get to boil a baby in its mother's milk? Why is that illegal? Or should we still be stoning people for infidelity? You rube? That we get that kind of stuff. We get these fruitless and silly questions, but we don't always know how to get out of it or how to explain away. And so, the goal of this is maybe to reframe the conversation so we can have a better answer. D.A. Carson, I think, helps us out a lot with a robust and very scholastic explanation. Now, let me know if I get his ideas wrong, because it's entirely possible I'm going to be using less words than he did to explain something, and so I'm probably already getting something wrong. So tell me in the comments where I strayed and whether you think there is a better idea. So typically there are a couple popular ways to think about God's law, and these verses in particular, 17 through 20. One popular way is to look at this through the lens of a civil, ceremonial, and moral law distinction. Okay? A tripartite, three-way kind of way to distinctively look at the different parts of the law. One is civil, one is ceremonial, one is moral. Okay? And it goes something like this. Jesus is only thinking about the moral law here. The 10 Commandments brought down by Moses. The civil and ceremonial laws are abolished. And so this is a way we can think about this. And so not a jot or tittle will leave. I will have fulfilled all the other laws, and and then maybe he's in the process of fulfilling this one too. I'm not sure, but the problems with this are to make three distinctive parts of the law is kind of a new creation, relatively speaking, in the Christian world. Carson seems to think it got more fleshed out with Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century. That's not to say he's wrong, okay? Thomas Aquinas is probably, or maybe not wrong here, but this actually came up when I was in college. I was actually toasted by my biology professor, of all people, with this. And I was making a comment on the board, on a message board, where I was talking to some folks and having a little bit of a fun debate. And he was, I made the point in this distinction of the three ways the law is seen. And he comes back at me and says, hey, you have a really good point if what you were saying was a real thing. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, this is a man-made construct to help us noodle this thing the Bible's talking about. But it's not actually in the Bible. Okay, now some of you may be screaming at me, hey, Trinity's not in the Bible either, and yet we believe that readily. This is probably a fairer point than the Trinity, okay? They're kind of strewn about. The last time I read the laws, they're all kind of over the place. It's hard to make the distinction, but we do. I didn't like his answer. I think Aquinas knew what he was talking about, but it's something that can be an obstacle to explanation. So, also, another problem with this is you can get into a law-by-law discussion, which at the end, you end up combating the good God of the New Testament versus the bad God of the Old Testament. And I don't think you want to get into that debate at any point during this conversation. I think you want to just start framing it the right way right off the bat. So, here's the second popular way to look at this. The second way is by combining Matthew 5, 17 through 20, where we're at, with Matthew 22, 34 through 40. Now, keep in mind, this is probably the most popular way to do this, and it's not D.A. Carson's way of doing it. So, keep that in mind. You're allowed to have this viewpoint. I don't think if D.A. Carson knows what he's talking about, I'm not sure it answers everything satisfactorily. So, but here it is. It goes something like this. Jesus has fulfilled the whole law, which you might understand as the threefold or tripartite way of looking at it. He fulfilled the whole thing, but we still obey the moral law, except now we do it in light of the Shema back in Deuteronomy and a couple other places, plus another commandment, love God and others in our hearts. In other words, Jesus gives us the law in its full meaning, not in any way that would have been unknown to us. And so included in his fulfillment of the law is the law to love. And so we plug that in everywhere now. And so now we know what he means when he says, I have not come to do away with the law. I have not the least point of the law will be done away with. Okay, we can just add love to it, and then we can follow this correctly. Okay? Now there are three problems with it, two of which I have trouble explaining, and actually a third of which I have trouble explaining. So you'll have to just deal with that. Carson doesn't like this interpretation of the word fulfill. And we'll talk about that a little bit. He also believes it ignores when Jesus talks about jots and tittles. And then three, he also believes it misinterprets chapter 22's love portion, the commandment to love God and love others. It's already a part of the scriptures, so it's kind of weird that that he pointed that out. That's one of the things I thought when I read it. But also, he contests love does not overtake the law. Sometimes people think that, okay, love and the love thing, love God, love neighbor, now that kind of constitutes the commandments, and we don't need to follow the commandments as closely unless it involves love and then the commandments, and so love becomes a superseding commandment. I don't think Carson would agree with that. I think he says we should follow the commandments because we love. I think love needs to be part of the equation. In other words, a cold, sterile, nasty religion that just makes you follow the rules is not what we're going for in chapter 22, and I think that's what Jesus is pointing out, and that's what I think the argument Carson would make. The problem with these arguments against this other theory, the problem with Carson's arguments is you'll have to take these arguments up with your friendly neighborhood Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic speaker. And actually, I believe our coming vicar, Vicar Vera, in her paperwork, it sure seems like she knows some of this stuff. So maybe this is a question for her. Unfortunately, I can only give you so much. So, if Carson's view is correct on his critiques, I like his explanation the best. And here we go with it. It seems to take a bigger view and a bigger picture. We're not going to talk individual laws. So maybe we even throw out the first part of what I just said in the first part. Sorry about that. I hope I didn't waste your time. But rather than talking about individual laws, these folks listening would have understood the law and the prophets to mean the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew Bible. All right? And when he translates the word fulfill, Carson does it from the Aramaic, which ends up making this translate to something closer to establish, confirm, or validate. Establish, confirm, or validate. So when Jesus says, do not think I have come to abolish the Old Testament, but to instead establish, confirm, and validate it, this translation gives this section an entirely different emphasis. I think now we can focus on what Matthew wants to focus on in his seeing Jesus. And in previous chapters, that is, Jesus establishes, validates, and confirms the Old Testament because the whole thing points to himself. Jesus establishes, validates, and confirms the Old Testament because the whole thing points to himself. Because of this, some things can become outdated. Some things can change, and sometimes our old and dusty understandings of things can become new and in new light understandings of things. The New Testament can see things in this way. And nothing is taking away, and nothing is being abolished, because to abolish any part of it would be to take away some part of it that points to Jesus. Okay? The point isn't a point-by-point, law-by-law thing. The whole thing is still relevant because the whole thing points to Christ. Does that make any sense? So, because of this perspective, it's still good. We can honestly say we need to pay attention to 2/3 of our holy book because Jesus is found there. But it also shows why God can go on and say the things he does in verses 21 through 48, where it seems like he's completely rewriting amazing misunderstandings that are happening with his word back then. Okay? Because when you conform to Jesus, you conform to and are presently obeying his law. So, did I lose you? I think if we were to sum it up, this part is not about laws and more laws. This part is about who does the Bible point to, and the Bible being back then, it would have been the Old Testament. Who does the Old Testament point to? And by that authority, the authority that Christ has, he can kind of reestablish things and validate things and confirm things and maybe give new spins and new understandings on ways we can understand things as read in the New Testament. And he has the authority and ability to do so because that's the authority given to him by the Scriptures. So, this particular section may not be a question of what Jesus is allowing. It may not be a shopping list of items of what we need to figure out in the law. That comes later in the next verses, 21 through 48. This part might just be a validation of the Scriptures in that they point to Jesus, who then points out to us our inability to follow the law. I think that's what he kind of gets at in 21 through 48, doesn't it? Don't just, if you don't just not murder your brother, don't hate him. Well, who's passed that test, right? And so he points out to us our inability to do that. And then he goes to the cross for those things. All right. Whew. Did that help? That's the question. I hope I didn't just waste your time, and I pray that I got it right. I spent a lot of hours studying this. And so I hope I gave you a little bit to that. We didn't talk about it fully and how that can still apply somewhat to every single law we know about. But I think it can help us somewhat if somebody comes at us with not well-known expectations for what the law meant in older times. So, may you have God's peace this week. I'm sorry, this is a hard way to teach. I'd rather have you here answering questions with me, but hopefully next week's subject's a little easier. God's blessings to you, and peace in Jesus. Amen.